Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kelly Writer's House. My name is Allie Katz. I am the program coordinator here. And this is the kind of real arts programming that is so fun. So I want to just thank Anthony DeCurtis once again for doing an amazing job bringing people here, in this case, Rob Sheffield, who are going to provide us not just with like a conversation about working in the arts or arts journalism, but also an additional layer of fun, in this case, a karaoke party. We have a lot of surprises in store for that. Instructions for signing up on that, there's like a piece of yellow, legal pad notebook paper back there at the tech desk. Just write your name and the song that you hope to sing, and our expert team will bring it up on YouTube because we don't have a karaoke machine, but it's going to be so much cooler than that. But anyway, I want to give another round of applause to Anthony for all of his great work and to Rob for coming. So thank you both.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. And thanks to Allie. I mean, I have to credit Allie for this evening. You know, the last time I had Rob here, God, do you remember when that was?
It would have been 2019.
2019. Okay, well, not that long ago. Rob's karaoke book had just come out. And I remember, I was telling everybody, like I usually do when I'm bringing guests here, what Rob was up to. And Allie said, well, why don't we just do a karaoke event? And Rob brought the house down. So those of you who are here, I mean, I hope I'm not unduly creating expectations, but I have no doubt that Rob is able to meet them. Rob, in addition to being a very gifted writer for Rolling Stone, as he's been for many years, is kind of a musical polymath. I mean, he's written about so many different subjects. He just came and spoke in my Beatles class, partly inspired by his book, Dreaming the Beatles. He's written a book about David Bowie. He's written a book called Love is a Mixtape, written a book about talking to girls about Duran. And apropos of tonight, he wrote a book about karaoke called Turn Around Bright Eyes. So, Rob is going to, I think, read a little bit. He's going to take our questions. We're going to talk to him. We'll have a great conversation. We just had a fantastic time in class. And, it will continue. And then the karaoke fun will begin. So without any further ado, as we say, I'd love to introduce my friend, Rob Sheffield.
This man is the best. Grew up idolizing this man. But cannot be said enough how much young writers looked up to Anthony. Something he was famous for, and I hope this is okay to say, but he would write the nice rejection letters when you sent out clips to editors, because the way it was done back then was you went to Kinko's and you Xeroxed your clips of stuff you'd written. Excuse my rustling and bustling. And you would mail them to editors who had no idea who you were, and you hoped that they would say, wow, this is so brilliant, come write for us. And everybody sent clips to Rolling Stone. Everybody knew that when you do that, the editor never writes back. Time the editor did write back was once the editor of a paper I sent clips to wrote back this 4-page letter about why they were so terrible. And it was really kind of shocking. But they never wrote back, and you just kind of knew that they never wrote back. Anthony would always write back, and he would never say, yes, we have lots of room, at the magazine, because they didn't. But he would always say something specific about what people wrote, encourage them to keep writing. It's amazing how writers of my generation still remember the nice notes that Anthony would write to these we were total nobody kids, cold sending clips, and it's only part of the reason why we idolize Anthony, but we all still idolize Anthony, and sometimes we will trade stories about letters that we wrote where he would find something to say specifically about something everybody wrote. But yeah, he's amazing. And thank you for having me here. I'd like to read something new, if that's okay. Work in progress. Just because I figured you would be the ones to know. But this is from something I'm writing. This is a book called The Cat on the Cover of Tapestry. It's about women singers, my lifelong fascination with women singers over the years. And of course, for me, total iconic album is Carole King, Tapestry. We've all spent time with that album. You're going through a moment in your life, like you spend time with that album. And one of the greatest album covers of all time, like Carole King is sitting there and the cat is sitting there, and we've all been that cat. And this is something, it's about Benny and the Jets, my favorite Elton John song. It's everybody's favorite Elton John song, isn't it? Yeah. It is. I don't know about you. I did not like. Yes, I did not like the movie Rocket Man about Elton. It was so sad. I'm not putting it down if you did like it. But the whole movie is Elton talking to his shrink about like sad childhood. I'm like, come on, Elton. It must have been kind of fun to be Elton John in the 70s. And it's funny that it had all his sad, serious songs, and it left out his really fun, dumb songs, and I love the fun, dumb songs. Benny and the Jets, a song that's very important to me. But this is a chapter because it's my favorite Elton John song, but it's also a chapter about the Ronettes song, Be My Baby, because Elton's song is a love letter to Ronnie Spector, because all rock and roll songs are love letters to Ronnie Spector. Ronnie Spector just died last year, and she was one of the most gigantic, one of the most undeniable, iconic pop voices ever. And it's amazing how 60 years later, you still hear Be My Baby everywhere. It still lights everybody up. And the same is true of Benny and the Jets. It's one of the most famous and popular songs in the world. Everybody loves this song. Everybody sings this song. Biz Markie sang it on stage with the Beastie Boys at Madison Square Garden. Lady Gaga sang it with Elton on a Muppets Christmas special. Check it out. It's really good. Miguel covered it with Whale. Everybody does a version of Benny and the Jets. It's a universal song. I have karaoke'd it with at least 2/5 of my friends. Everybody knows and loves this song, so it's easy to overlook how insane it is. To be blunt, it's a song about being a boy listening to girls sing. It's a song about being a sniffly little hermit boy named Elton, or if we're being biographical, Reginald Dwight, which was his birth name, growing up somewhere in England, lonely and closeted and miserable. But he hears the Ronettes on the radio, and he decides he should be a pop star. If you've seen a photo of Elton John, you knew that it took a lot of imagination for him to say, I'm going to be a pop star. He didn't look like the kind of person who was usually a pop star in the 70s. But he decides he should be a pop star, so he starts playing the piano and wearing silly pants and groovy glasses and devouring 80% of the cocaine in the world, yet he still manages to look like a balding dental hygienist. It's part of why we all love Elton. He was a total geek with no natural charisma, no stage presence, not even much of a voice. All he had was obsessive devotion to pop music and obsession devotion to girl singers. And in Benny and the Jets, he's singing about a glam rock super group called Benny and the Jets, telling the kids in the audience that although we are despised by the adult world, we will triumph tonight when the girls take the stage. He spends the whole song singing about this fictional group, Benny and the Jets, and telling us how cool they are. Candy and Ronnie, have you seen them yet? Oh, but they're so spaced out. Benny and the Jets. Oh, but they're weird and they're wonderful. Oh, Benny, she's really keen. She's got electric boots, a mohair suit. You know, I read it in a magazine. Benny and the Jets. It's obviously inspired by the Ronettes. The girls in this song are the Ronettes. Their names are Candy and Ronnie and Benny, which is an in-joke for Ronettes fans because Ronnie Spector's name was Ronnie Bennett before she married Phil Spector. One of the most tragic marriages in pop music history, and very much beautiful part of Ronnie's story is how she escaped that particular marriage. Benny and the Jets is his love letter to Ronnie Bennett Spector. And like so many singers, Elton John heard something in Ronnie's voice that screwed up his entire life. So many rock and roll legends were boys who just wanted to impress Ronnie Spector. The first one obviously being Phil Spector, who made his best records for the Ronettes. He built Be My Baby as a cathedral, a shrine to Ronnie. And then there's Bruce Springsteen, who is maybe or maybe not performing in Philadelphia tonight. Half his songs sound like Be My Baby, and he's always said that's one of his key inspirations. And should we mention Eddie Money? Of course we should. I talked to Brian Wilson once about Ronnie Spector in 1999. I was interviewing him about Good Vibrations. It's one of the most fun interviews I ever did. It was during his mega hermit phase. He's had a lot of those. I think he's having another one now. And he was not doing any interviews at all, but he agreed to talk about Good Vibrations. He said he was driving in his car one day with the radio on, and he heard Be My Baby for the first time, and he had to pull over to the side of the road and cry. It was the most powerful voice he'd ever heard. The amazing thing about this interview for me was he was watching TV at the time. Brian Wilson was in bed, and he was talking to me on the phone, and he had the TV on really loud. It was the People's Court. He was watching Judge Wapner on the People's Court, and I asked him, where does a song like Good Vibrations come from? And he said, from God and Ronnie Spector. And then he starts talking about Be My Baby. He gets so excited. He says, let me mute the TV. And I thought, this is the best interview of my life. Brian Wilson is muting the TV to talk to me about Benny and the Jets, about Be My Baby. Be My Baby was my second favorite. When I was a maudlin boy, alone in my room listening to Ronettes, my favorite was called Walking in the Rain. However, I've never met a single person in my whole life who agrees with me, so it is at least theoretically possible that I am wrong. Brian Wilson built his whole career around loving Ronnie Spector. So did everybody. The Beatles just invaded America as an excuse to meet Ronnie Spector. They hung out with her in Spanish Harlem. She always joked about how everybody laughed at them in Spanish Harlem because the Beatles had long hair. And she said, the Beatles were used to being stared at wherever they went. Wherever they went with me, nobody stared at them because they were staring at me. I love that. The New York Dolls invented punk rock just trying to imitate Ronnie Spector. So did Madonna. When she blew up in 1985, she explained her fashion sense in the very first issue of Spin magazine. I like to look the way Ronnie Spector sounded. Sexy, hungry, totally trashy. But it was Elton's love letter to Ronnie that was the best because it was the most insane. Benny and the Jets, every second of that record is demented. Mere cocaine does not explain it because the 70s had millions of coke-fried rock stars, but only one Benny and the Jets. Elton dubs in a fake audience to make it sound like a live concert where everybody's clapping and screaming. Who does that? It's a studio record. Everybody knows this isn't a real audience. The song fades out. Concerts do not fade out. He's not fooling anybody, but he does this because he wants to pretend he's part of a crowd instead of just a dorky dude alone in his room with only a staticky AM radio to keep him company. He uses all the fake audience noise because he wants you to think he's part of that audience, out where there's music and there's people and they're young and alive. He went on Soul Train to sing this one, singing with a feather in his cap and a green velvet suit, despite the fact that nobody can really dance to Benny and the Jets. If you watch the YouTube clip of Elton on Soul Train, it is really kind of surreal. Everybody's on Soul Train trying to dance, and he's doing Benny and the Jets, which is just not a very danceable song. Elton also was the whitest man in history up to that point to be on Soul Train. His record was soon broken by David Bowie. Elton's glam rock queens became a permanent part of pop mythology. Elton's Jets became Bowie's suffragettes, who became Paul McCartney's Jets, who became Brian Eno's Warm Jets, who became the Jets. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Jets. They were an 80s pop group who sang aerobics era classics like You Got It All Over Him and my personal favorite, Rocket to You, which is Rocket to You. For a pop boy, there is no emotion that is purer or stronger or realer than the emotion you hear in the girl's voice on the radio. The girl on the radio has an absolute truth in her voice, a gnosis, and all the boy singer can do is imitate it. The girl singer has the realness that the boy singer craves. Every boy singer worth his salt hears his own voice as a dim echo of Ronnie Spector's voice. Ronnie Spector's voice is everywhere, and it's everything. It's in the way that the Jesus and Mary Chain begin their debut album, Psycho Candy, with the drum beat from Be My Baby. You all know that drum beat. Boom, 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 ch. It's in the way Poison, the hair metal band, also began their debut album with the drum beat from Be My Baby. It's the way that Martin Scorsese began his first big movie, Mean Streets, with that same beat. The same beat that also begins Dirty Dancing and ends Lost in Translation. At the end of Lost in Translation, as Scarlett Johansson rides away in the Tokyo taxi, the music she hears in her head is Be My Baby, even though she's listening to the Jesus and Mary Chain version, which was called Just Like Honey. Joey Ramone loved the Ronettes the way he never even loved the Ramones. When Joey Ramone sang New York City really has it all, what he really meant was New York City has Ronnie Spector, and Ronnie Spector is all. Oh yeah, oh yeah. In his later years, he loved to duet with Ronnie Spector. She would sing his song She Talks to Rainbows like he wrote it for her, and in a way, all of Joey Ramone's songs are songs that he wrote for her. Benny and the Jets is Elton artificially creating a fake live concert so everybody can join him in cheering for the Ronettes and cheering for Ronnie Spector. But that fake audience became a real audience as the song traveled around the world. That's because Elton John, like the Beach Boys, like Jay-Z, like the Beatles, like Madonna, like Beyonce, was the kind of genius who could take his private fantasies of pop music and make them sound like everybody's fantasies, fantasies that the whole world could share. So we hear Elton sing Benny and the Jets, and we smile because we know it's a lonely, dorky kid in his room in the radio somewhere in England. But we also know that he's Brian Wilson listening to the same voice in Southern California on the other side of the world. In that moment, he's the Beatles listening to the Shirelles, or the Rolling Stones listening to Irma Thomas, or Prince listening to Joni Mitchell. Everybody listening to Joni Mitchell. He's Kurt Cobain listening to the Raincoats and Frightwig. He's Nick Cave growing up in Australia listening to Nina Simone and Nancy Sinatra. He's Kanye West growing up in Chicago listening to Shaka Khan and going through the wire just to tell her how much he loves her. He's Lou Reed listening to the Shirelles, Johnny Thunders listening to the Shirelles, everybody listening to the Shirelles. He's Lou Reed listening to Carole King, Brian Ferry listening to Carole King, Beyonce listening to Carole King, everybody listening to Carole King. He's Elvis singing to Ruth Brown, Bowie listening to Donna Summer, everybody listening to Donna Summer, Bono listening to Patti Smith, Morrissey listening to Dusty Springfield and Patti Smith, Simon Le Bon listening to Patti Smith, everybody listening to Patti Smith. He's Kanye West listening to Brenda Lee. He's The Clash listening to The Slits. He's Biggie listening to Lil' Kim. He's LL Cool J listening to LaShawn. He's Boy George and Green Gartside and every new wave artist who ever plugged in a synthesizer and sang about Aretha Franklin. As my favorite philosopher Lil' Kim once said, inside every man is a bad girl, and Ronnie Spector is that girl, and she is bad. To be a boy hearing that voice is to know that her badness is beyond you. If you tried to be as cool as Ronnie Spector for one day, you would crumble like feta cheese. She's been a lot of different Ronnie Spectors. She's been rich Ronnie Spector and poor Ronnie Spector. She's been famous Ronnie Spector and washed up Ronnie Spector. She's been married Ronnie Spector and she's been free Ronnie Spector. She's been a million Ronnie Spectors, and you will never be as cool as any of them. She is Benny. You will only be one of her jets. Everybody who hears Be My Baby hears their own voice as a bad cover version of Ronnie Spector. Elton worshipped that girl noise in her voice. All he wanted to do was echo that girl noise, amplify it, make it louder, and then pass it on to the world. That's what pop music is. We are all the Jets. Thank you. I love Ronnie Spector so much. She just did a new version of her autobiography, which is highly recommended. And Phil Spector would always make her watch Citizen Kane with him, which is, great movie. But over and over, she's watching Citizen Kane with Phil Spector. And of course, a huge subplot in that movie is that Citizen Kane marries this woman so he can mold her into an opera singer. And she doesn't want to be an opera singer. And so much of the movie is him trying to make her into an opera star. And great scene in the movie where she says, everything was his idea except me leaving him. And I always think about how many times Ronnie Spector watched that scene in the movie until she finally got the freedom to leave him. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, beautiful story. But yes, let's have some questions about music.
Hi.
About Danny and the Jets. Did Elton go to Bernie Taupin and say, write me a song about, or did Elton come up with the idea with some?
I don't know. It's funny because part of the awesome mystique of Elvis and Bernie is that they never interfered, and that Elton would sometimes like tell him ideas, but he would always take pride in saying that he never asked Bernie what the songs were about. So people in interviews always ask Elton whether Leave On is about Levon Helm, and Elton always says, I have no idea. You'd have to ask him. I never ask him. So it's funny that they had this really like beautiful separation of how they wrote. But Bernie has never commented on that. So it's interesting how
So is it a song from Bernie, sung through Elton?
it's weird. It seems like it was. And it's funny that it seems like sometimes Elton and Bernie would be talking about an idea, or sometimes it'd be something in Elton's life that Bernie had noticed. The famous story of Someone Saved My Life Tonight, where he's talking about a very sad moment in Elton's life. But it's funny how many of their songs that they did together were random. There's a great story. Ken Scott, who was a producer, he had this great, and he produced the song Rocket Man. And he said that Bernie Taupin would just stay up late at night and just smoke weed and just type up lyrics on his typewriter. Then he'd bring them down to breakfast, and the whole band would be like having breakfast together. And Elton would go through this stack of lyrics, and he picked out one, and he said, oh, I like this one. And he goes over to the piano while everybody else is finishing up their breakfast, and he just writes Rocket Man right there while everybody else in the band is eating breakfast. And by the time they're done, he's like, okay, let's record this one. And 20 minutes later, they're recording Rocket Man. And it's so funny because I've spent so much of my life pondering Rocket Man, pondering that song, and super identifying with that song and wondering about all the mysteries in that song. And it was just something Bernie brought down to breakfast one day. It's really funny. It's kind of thing, the mysteries of songwriting.
Thank you so much for coming. I really enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you.
I was wondering, how has the way that you write about musicians and the way that you write about music changed over the course of your career, especially since it seems like the connections that you have to some of these people and some of these songs seems very intimate and from a very young age?
It's really interesting because, when I started writing about music, I was basically a kid writing about grown-ups. And it's funny because I still feel like I have those long-running sort of internal relationships with these people whose music I'm really obsessed by. So even, after I will talk to somebody or meet somebody who I've got this intense relationship with their songs, and that doesn't really affect, the main relationship is the one I have with their songs. So, I mean, Paul McCartney is somebody who, we were talking about today in class, and he is someone who I had an interview with a couple of years ago. And it was a Zoom, and it was super fun because I was hosting the Zoom, so it had the thing of Paul McCartney is waiting to be admitted, and it said that, and I was like, yes, it sounded like someone's knocking at the door, somebody's ringing the bell. But it was funny, to talk to Paul McCartney and ask all these questions that I've had, in my head, this Paul McCartney that I've been having these conversations with in my head, since I was a little kid. But it's funny that for me, the real Paul McCartney is the one in the songs. And that's still the one that I have that relationship with. And no matter how much older and pseudo wiser I get writing about music, I still feel like on some level, like I'm a kid and they're the grown-ups. It's really weird that way. But because music's always changing, writing about it is always changing. And that's something that's fun. Music is always expanding and evolving. So much of it used to be I was sitting in my room listening to songs and wondering what they meant by the words. And of course, the older you get, the more you realize that the words, they're just kind of winging it, they're just often just trying to fill up the space. But I love to ponder all the details of these songs.
I have another question if nobody else has a question. I was wondering, I was interested in the kind of pantheon of people and bands that you name where everybody listens to this person, everybody listens. And I was wondering, is there something that you feel like all the musicians or the music that you like most has in common? And like, is there, talking when you mentioned that music always changes, is there something that you think that all music that you don't like has in common? Or I don't know.
Yeah, I do think there's the common thing, which is that it's made by fans, and that I feel like music that's of any interest is made by fans. And it's weird to see that for these people who make music, that their main thing is starting out as a fan and always being a fan. One of the most amazing live shows I've ever seen in my entire life was Beyonce on the Lemonade tour, and that was in 2016. And that was early summer. It was just a couple months after Prince passed away. And okay, everybody is there for Beyonce. Nobody needs her to do a tribute to Prince. We assume she loves Prince. Everybody's there just to worship Beyonce. But she has this Prince interlude in the middle of her show. I don't know if any of you saw that tour. She said, I'm going to do a song by my hero. And it was wild because we thought, okay, like she'll do, Purple Rain or something like that. She did a deep cut. She did The Beautiful Ones, which is from the movie Purple Rain. If you know that song, it's a long song and it's impossible to sing. And you can't do a short version of it because it builds from quiet to loud, and it's an epic. And once you sing that song, you go all the way through that song. And she's doing The Beautiful Ones. And again, this is Beyonce's show. Everybody is there for her. And she just wanted this moment to pay her respects to Prince. And it was such a mind-blowing moment just because just as a singing performance, it's impossible for anybody except for Prince to sing The Beautiful Ones. Speaking of somebody who's tried it at karaoke with tragic results. And it was just really amazing to see that for her, the fan, the part of Beyonce that is, in addition to all the other kinds of genius she is, she's a fan at heart. And to see that just like come out in such a spectacular way was really kind of shocking, that for a moment in her show, she wanted the attention to be on a musician that she was a fan of and somebody that she idolized. And there was something so pure and so shocking about that. It's amazing because the whole show is amazing, but that was really just a genuine surprise, just really amazing moment. But I love when music is made by fans for fans. I feel like that's the purest and realist.
What's it like to talk to artists about that inspiration? Can you kind of like find common ground? Like you're kind of obsessing over them, they're obsessing over.
Yeah, it's usually a topic that relaxes them because they would rather talk about music that they like and admire, because they feel sort of off the clock that way. So definitely, like when I'm interviewing people, especially if they're people that like I kind of idolize and I'm a little nervous about, I like hearing them talk about the music that they like, and that warms them up. For some reason, I always ask people about Cyndi Lauper. Everybody loves Cyndi Lauper. Everybody. And if an interview is not going well, I will just like throw in a random question about Cyndi Lauper. Everybody has a story about listening to Cyndi Lauper. Everybody. And it's really funny that it never fails. But anybody who devotes their life to music, they're a fan at heart. So I very much like to sort of get them talking about that. I was interviewing James Taylor once in the 90s. He was so cool and so nice, and he was so funny. And he didn't want to talk about his music. He just wanted to talk about music that he liked. He talked about Ray Charles for such a long time. He talked about the new Randy Newman album, which was called Bad Love, and there was a song on that called Shame. And he just said, "Have you heard? Can you believe that fucking thing?" And it was like, the more excited he got talking about that music, the more he sort of like loosened up. So after that, he was in the mood to talk about his own music. But yeah, it's always fascinating to me how really loving music is just common ground for connecting with almost anybody.
So I'm
We need the microphone.
Oh, the microphone. Okay. So I'm just particularly blown away that you interviewed Brian Wilson because I love the Beach Boys more than anything. So I was just wondering, of all the famous people that you've met, everyone you've interviewed, is there anyone who's particularly intimidated you?
Oh my gosh, a time or two. I was so intimidated to talk to Brian Wilson, also because I put in the request assuming he'd say no. He never said no to anything. As it turns out, his wife had read something that I wrote that she liked, and she remembered my name, so she arranged for him to do this interview. And it was just that they'd done a terrible made-for-TV movie about the Beach Boys that John Stamos produced. And it was very much from the Mike Love perspective. So it was a really anti-Brian Wilson kind of movie. And I just really kind of savagely made fun of it because I was like, what's the point of making a movie about the Beach Boys that's just designed for people who hate Brian Wilson? And for some reason, his wife remembered that. And so I got to talk to him. And I was so intimidated. Again, like he had the TV going like really loud. So I figured like, thank God that talking about Ronnie Spector made him actually. But when he said, I'm just going to mute the TV, that was one of my most triumphant personal moments. But talking to, it's funny because like I've done Zooms in the past couple of years, which are sometimes intimidating, but I've done a few of those with Ringo Starr, who is someone that I'm super intimidated by, even though it seems like he's lovable Ringo. But to me, he's Ringo. Like he's a Beatle, and he was my first favorite Beatle. I think for most kids, like Ringo's the first one that you just really bond with. And I was Zooming, so I was like, okay, all the Beatles stuff in my room, I'm gonna hide it because I don't want him to see Beatles stuff on my wall or on my desk and think that I'm like, just trying to suck up to him or anything. So I had it just all on the floor because there's a lot of it. And I'm Zooming with Ringo, and he says, hey, is that Bob I see? I'm not going to try to do his voice. And I had a Dylan album behind me. And I said, oh, yes, that's Dylan album. And he's like, I don't see any of my stuff in your room. I was like, that's because I hid it on the floor. I was like, you want to? And I was like, you want to see my copy of Boku's of Blues, the country album you made in 1970? But it was funny that like after he saw stuff like that, like I was like, here's a 8-track tape of the Blue album. But it's funny that I get intimidated by these people until sort of that connection that they're fans too, and it's weird that that's always that's why we're doing this. That's why they've devoted their life to making music. It's why I write about music. So the intimidation thing usually goes away once the common love of music comes up. Right. Some people, honestly, Bob Dylan, like that's someone that I draw the line. I would not meet or talk to or interview Bob Dylan because I'm just too scared of the Bob Dylan in my brain. So like that's really the one where I would draw the line. I've been intimidated by other people just because they're so like charismatic and intense. But yeah, it's weird that there's one in my head that I was like, yes, I just don't want to ever interview Bob Dylan. Yeah. I worship him too much.
Thank you so much for coming. I have 2 questions. I'm a big fan of your reviews of Taylor Swift. I've been reading them for a long time, so very excited you were coming. And I guess I have 2 questions. One would be, you kind of tracked her career from the very beginning, and I'm curious to know like where you see her going. She had such a big year, and also if there's any projects or styles that you'd like to see from her. And then also, I know that you write in your rankings and in the Midnight's album that she kind of like sets up these emotional rules for herself and how she should feel, you say, and how other people should feel, and then she kind of just goes forward and subverts it and totally ignores it. And I'm wondering, why do you think she does that? What's the emotional impact in the music? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I love that. First of all, condolences on not being in Glendale for the start of the Eras tour. It's it's sort of an exile for Swifties to not be there because nobody has any idea what she's going to do with this. She is so fascinating to me as somebody, talk about like a musician where it all comes down to being a fan. She is as obsessive and eccentric and super, super, super focused as any fan is of her music. She's that focused on the music that she loves. So it is always fascinating to see where she goes. I love Midnights. It was not at all what I was expecting. but she always does the unexpected. It's really weird. When I heard 1989 for the first time, I was in her apartment in Tribeca listening to it because they did not trust, certainly they didn't trust anyone with an advanced stream, and there were only 2 copies of it in existence on CD. And one was on the West Coast and one was on the East Coast. And the guy who had the 1989 CD, I was going to listen to it, and then he was going to take it and board a plane and take it to Nashville. But there was only one copy for anybody to listen to. And that was right after Red, and I was, sitting on her couch and listening to 1989 and the first song, Welcome to New York. And I'm like, my God, what is she doing? She's like, this sounds like Depeche Mode or the Pet Shop Boys. This is so different from anything she's done before. And she keeps going with those synth poppy songs. I was like, what is she thinking? This is going to really divide and polarize people, which it did, but it was also a totally brilliant move. And I thought, well, thank God she isn't taking advice from idiots like me. And somebody that every single time she makes an album, I think, this is not what I would have advised. I'm glad she's not taking advice from me. She never does the sensible thing. The whole thing of her doing the remakes of her albums, there's absolutely nothing sensible about that. When she said that she was going to start doing the Taylor's version, I thought she was just bluffing. I guess she never bluffs. And when she did Folklore and Evermore, those are my favorites. I'm that kind of Swift fan. But then with Midnight, such a jump from that into such a pop kind of record, and I love Midnights. I feel like I'm still kind of figuring it out. The songs are so intense emotionally. In terms of ranking the songs you mentioned, I do this list that I've done at Rolling Stone of ranking all of Taylor Swift's songs, just as an excuse to write about every single one of them. The first time I did the list was 5 years ago. There were 112 songs. There's now 230 of them. She has doubled her catalog in 5 years. That is completely insane. And I'm still listening to the Midnight songs and saying, that one was too low on the list. That one was too high on the list. And it's weird that I'm still sort of unpacking all the emotional damage that those songs have done to me over the past few years. It was really rude of her to do it. But in terms of where she's going to go next or what she will do next, something I love about her is it's always different from what I would expect or what I would predict or definitely what I would advise. I would be the worst manager. What is your era for her?
Oh, in terms of what I think is best?
Yeah.
Okay, so Folklore is, I think, her overall best written album, but for me, the one I have the most emotional connection to is probably Speak Now or Red.
Yeah, I have to say, Midnight sent me back to Speak Now in a big way, and I'm kind of re-obsessed with Speak Now. The songs are so long.
They're so good.
They're so good. They're so long. I love how all those songs, and this goes with what you were saying about what I wrote about how she makes really rigid emotional rules for herself about what she's going to let herself feel. And then she tramples all over her own rules and tramples all over her own boundaries. And boy, Speak Now, it's those are really messy songs, and she's okay, this is what I'm going to feel, and then she just completely ignores that. My favorite is Delicate, where she's hey, this is cool. We're just casual, we're just kind of hanging out, meeting in dive bars. That's really cool. Isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it? And it's that it's just so tailored that she keeps elbowing you in the ribs to just say isn't it cool being so casual and nonchalant and it's so outside of her emotional wheelhouse and that's something I love about her and something I kind of identify with, that she really has specific ideas of how she wants to feel and how she's going to let herself feel. And she's always surprised when she can't do it that way. I'd be lying if I said I didn't relate.
I feel like we ought to begin our transition to the karaoke portion of the evening. And so why don't you just talk about that book for a minute and, what is it about karaoke that speaks to you so deeply and, maybe a little bit of what we can anticipate this evening.
Wow. I love karaoke because singing karaoke is the first time in my life that I was able to perform music, because I'm a terrible singer, and I've tried to play many instruments over the years. I tried guitar, I tried piano, I tried horn. I don't have that yet. It's always a project for the future. I still have a guitar. I still fiddle with it. I'm going to learn it eventually. I'm going to get good eventually. It might take until my 70s or 80s. But for me, karaoke was the first thing that allowed me to like get up and sing in front of other people, and they would actually sit there and listen and applaud. And the beautiful thing about karaoke is that we cheer each other on. We applaud each other for doing things that we are terrible at doing. I just had my birthday in February, had a karaoke birthday, and I sang, speaking of Taylor Swift songs, I sang Enchanted, which is not just a difficult song to sing, but a really messy song emotionally. You're really asking a lot of people if you're like, all right, and I was very much being the birthday boy. I was like, okay, everybody, like, I'm going to sing this song, like, and it's going to be messy and long, and that's what friends do. They listen to each other sing Enchanted. And it was quite terrible, but it was so fun. And for me, karaoke is the first time I was able to become part of the music. And that's something I love about it is that really all the different ways of loving music come together in karaoke. Something I find is that people who make music love to do karaoke, that it's almost like they get to do it as amateurs as opposed to like having to do it at pros. I'm reliably told that Taylor Swift is obsessed with doing karaoke. I'm reliably told that Beyonce is obsessed with doing karaoke. They don't do it in public places. They like to just be with their friends and just do normal, regular person, no talented person karaoke. And for me, that's a very pure kind of music love. And for me, as somebody who's not musically gifted, to say the least, I love being able to participate in music that way and to have my friends participate in music that way.
Well, let's thank Rob for being here this evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Where are we doing this?
I'm going to drop this screen now.
Oh my God.